I'd like to welcome you to the 5th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. This morning, we convene our first public hearing pursuant to the inquiry into the state strategy for implementing unproclaimed legislation passed by Parliament during the last 20 years. So, in fact, our research has shown that there are actually 10 pieces of such legislation, but today's session will focus on the implementation of the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act, which is a 2014 piece of legislation. I'd like to remind you of the key guidelines for our virtual meeting. Certain specific guidelines apply. Ensure that you mute your microphone when you are not speaking to help to keep background noises to a minimum. Adjust your camera so that your face is clearly visible. Ensure that notifications from your cell phone or any other electronic device in your vicinity are muted during the course of the meeting. I think we've been doing well so far for the past few meetings. Members of the listening and viewing audience are invited to post or send your comments via the Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook page, ParlView, the Parliament's YouTube channel, and Twitter. I would particularly like to welcome the only entity we have with us this morning, the Ministry of Planning and Development. And if I may just digress a bit and put on my teacher's hat to explain, because remember we have viewing audience, listening audience, and people may not clearly understand what is happening here, what is the import of what we are looking at. Now, you have been looking, I am sure, at the Parliament channel, and you have been seeing members of the legislature, both houses of Parliament, passing bills, and one will be tempted to think that once a bill is passed in the Parliament, that bill becomes law. Generally, a bill will become law after it receives the assent of the President. But there are times, and you will actually see it within the bill itself, where the bill says that it will come into operation on such date as is fixed by the President by proclamation. So when the bill is proclaimed, the bill having been passed is proclaimed, then it will become law. But that is not always the end of the matter. Some pieces of legislation, and if I may use as an example, the Children's Authority Act. It says, this act, except those sections referred to in subsection 2, comes into operation on a day fixed by the President by proclamation. Now, this section 2 calls into question a number of sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, so and so, which came into operation on the 5th of December. But there were other sections which do not or did not come into operation right away. And what would happen is that you will see a notice of proclamation, which tells you that this act comes into force on a particular date. So when we passed the domestic violence amendment legislation, it came into force once it received proclamation. But other pieces of legislation, once it awaits proclamation, we have to wait for that proclamation. Also, what happens is that you may have partial proclamation, you may have what is called as well an implementation schedule at times. So the act itself may say that this section will come into force now, another section will come into force at another time, and so on. And a case in point is the, not in Trinidad, but I remember the Scotland Children Act, had an implementation schedule which said well, this would come into force, this section and such a time. And if we had done that with the Children Act, because we were not ready with all of the infrastructure, it would have, saved us a lot of time, a lot of money, that we had to pay out because certain things were proclaimed, certain things came into force, and the necessary infrastructure was not there. So those are various strategies. You have partial proclamation, and sometimes you proclaim and then you realize that, you're just not ready. And sometimes it seems that somebody may have forgotten to do certain things, so that the act is lying there and we're wondering what is happening with it. So having reviewed the pieces of legislation that have been passed, we were of the view that we ought to do something about it to bring some of it so very important into force. So what we are doing this morning is inquiring into this piece of legislation. And before I go there to tell you the inquiry objectives, I'm going to ask the officials to introduce themselves, and then we will introduce ourselves to you. So we start with Ms. Marie Hines.
Good morning, Marie Hines, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Planning and Development. It's lovely to see you, Chair.
Yes, I thought that name was familiar. Welcome. Mr. Ali.
Good morning, all. Rick Javed Ali, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
And Dr. Ansel Kirk.
Good morning, everyone. Ansel Kirk, Assistant Coordinator at the Town Country Planning Division.
And I'm Hazel Thompson Ahi, and I'm Chair of this committee, the JSC on Finance and Legal Affairs. And I now call on members to introduce themselves.
I'm Marvin Gonzalez, member.
Good morning, Terence Dial Singh, member.
Morning, Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal, member.
Nick, you got all those points?
Yeah, so I can address it now. Good morning, Hasu Bakas, member.
I didn't hear Mr. Rambarat. I think you were muted.
Clarence, your mic is muted.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Clarence Rambarat, member of this committee.
Gonzalez, Mrs. Cotland, not here. So we have Minister Dayal Singh is here. Well, he introduced himself, I think. He was the first. Yes. The objectives of this inquiry are 4 in number: to determine the factors that are contributing to the delay in the full proclamation of the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act 2014. To determine the sections of the act that can be implemented without delay, perhaps we should say further delay. 3, the sections of the act that require more time and/or input for operationalization, and the impact that the delay in the full proclamation of the act has had on national planning and development. So I will now call on Ms. Hines, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development, to make brief opening remarks, maximum of 2 minutes.
Good morning again, Chair, Chairman and members of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs, as well as the viewing public. The Ministry of Planning and Development thanks you for the opportunity to discuss the implementation of the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act 2014 and looks forward to the further guidance and recommendations that may proceed from this discourse. When fully implemented, the PAFT Act will allow for, inter alia, the decentralization of the administration of planning, devolution of development planning and control functions to municipal corporations, simplification of the certification and adoption process in the preparation of development plans. The intent of this act is to facilitate more extensive enforcement mechanisms and provide for stricter penalties for contravention of land use regulations. This act represents a significant reform initiative that is designed to bring services relevant to the development of land closer to the people. In addition, the full proclamation of the PAFT Act would further assist with the effective implementation of government's framework as articulated in the National Development Strategy known as Vision 2030, particularly under Theme 2, Delivering Good Governance and Service Excellence, as well as Theme 5, Placing the Environment at the Center of Social and Economic Development. Madam Chair, the proclamation of key sections of the PAFT Act by Cabinet in 2015, particularly Section 6, referring to the establishment of the National Planning Authority, and Section 13, Departments and Offices of the National Planning Authority, was made to facilitate the operationalization of non-legal mechanisms, which in the view of this ministry are necessary before the rest of the act can be proclaimed. The ministry then established a PAFT Implementation Committee, which comprised the key representatives from the Ministry of Planning and Development, as well as the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Some of these were the major stakeholders in the first instance. The work of the committee began with the development of an implementation schedule, a comprehensive plan of action, which we have shared with our key stakeholders, the Ministry of Rural Development and even the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. The work is multifaceted and it requires dedicated resources to which we regrettably admit we did not always have. Notwithstanding the above, much has been accomplished to date in an effort to partially achieve the intent of the Act, while grappling with a myriad of complex issues pertinent to full proclamation. This would include efforts by the Town and Country Planning Division to transform its services to the public in 3 significant areas, namely improving service delivery, digitization of TCPD records and applications, and the automation of the construction permitting system known as Develop TT. The division has updated policies and created new spatial guidelines that will be handed over to the municipal corporations once they are ready to receive same. In closing, Madam Chair, I would like to thank you again for this opportunity to meet with the committee. My team stands ready to provide further information that would assist the committee on our fruitful discussions on this important inquiry. Thank you.
That these laudable objectives that you've enunciated and the work that you said, the implementation committee and so on, that we have not advanced further. So I do hope that at the end of the day, we will get further enlightenment as to where the hurdles are that need to be jumped. Because of you, as you've said in your paper, the current planning legislation is outdated, unable to effectively and efficiently respond to today's development issues of poverty, access to land, informal settlement, local economic development, sustainable development, climate change impacts, community participation, and local government empowerment. And there is an increasing amount of development occurring without relevant planning permission, and consequently, the land use planning system may be perceived as not functioning effectively. So we proceed, and hopefully at the end of the day, we would be a little nearer because I'm a little concerned when I read that although proclamation would assist in improving the integrity and efficiency in the development planning process, the ministry in the interim has the ability to establish special boards or committees through cabinet appointments to undertake specific activities as required. Getting a sense that somehow there is some comfort with what is existing now. We're making out, but that's not what you said in the beginning, and that's not how I think generally it should be perceived. So we want to marry the objective, the laudable objectives, to the view that we're going okay, because we're not going okay, especially with these climate changes and things that are happening in the environment, and the expertise that we need to work at to make ultimately a better Trinidad and Tobago. So let's proceed and see how it goes. Members? Has Ms. Hines answered all the questions already?
Yes, maybe I could ask the opening question, Madam Chair. The committee was obviously taken aback a bit in the written submission, which the public has not seen, that the team has not been able to commit to a date or a timeline for full implementation of the legislation. And a part of it has to do with the operationalization of the national planning, the national planning body. So would you be able to identify for us what remains to be done in summary, in terms of full proclamation, taking us to full proclamation of the legislation, and what sort of timeframes are involved in getting there?
Thank you for that question, member. Maybe I could share with you the 7 components that we thought necessary when we were creating the implementation strategy. I do need you to understand, I understand what you're saying in that the National Planning Authority, it is the key responsibility of the Ministry of Planning and Development to implement that part especially. But it goes hand in hand with what's happening at the level of local government. When the National Planning Authority is in fact established, we also have to have municipal corporations who are ready to take on their part of the responsibility. Let me explain. Applications will then be submitted through the relevant municipal corporation. Their responsibility, according to the PAFT Act and according to the local government reform policy, would be to process simple applications. Complex applications will then be forwarded to the National Planning Authority. Therefore, both sides of the coin have got to be institutionally ready to proceed with full proclamation. So one of the things that must happen, I think we put it in our response, particular organizational structures have to come into place. National Plan Authority is one, but on the other side, in terms of the municipal corporations, we are talking about their spatial planning units also need to be developed. A certain level of capacity analysis and strengthening has to take place. As such, what the Ministry of Planning did is craft a capacity building program, and then we handed that over to our colleagues at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, and they decided that they wanted to add some more courses, we could call it that, a bit more they thought their people would be needed. It is still with them, and they are working on that. We also have to do the very challenging thing of figuring out how do you deal with staff, because the municipal corporations do not really have the technical capacity. So there's got to be a way to transition staff. You have to get the DPA involved, the CPO involved, as well as the unions, and we've started some of that work already. So quite a bit is being done. You also have to, for full proclamation to happen and for it to make sense, you have to have all of the policies necessary to be able to hand over, including 1 or 2 outstanding regulations. So I want to say that the work has begun. Clearly, it's not completed because we have not fully proclaimed. Then you asked me what kind of time frame. When we did the schedule, we came up with over 300 man days would be required to put all of this into place. With all things going well, and if we manage risk properly, that's what's supposed to have happened. It's going to take not less than that time, I would think. We have engaged consultants to help us craft what NPA, a National Planning Authority, should look like, and we are about to authorize them to go out and seek the relevant positions as well for the National Planning Authority, some of the key positions in the legislation. That's what I can share with you just for now.
Madam Chair, through you, may I ask Ms. Hines a question, please? And the question is, Ms. Hines, this inquiry is being held in public. So question, could you, for the sake of the public, please let them understand what is a simple application, what is a complex application, so the public will know. And then my question is, how does this now have to cross-reference with local government reform?
Thank you. I don't want to speak off the top of my head, so I'm just finding the relevant legislation that defines the simple application, the amendments. Yeah. So for the sake of the public, how it's supposed to work. So let me explain the second part first. Right now, when you have an application for development, you come to the Town and Country Planning Division, it starts there. We do our part. That part is to assess whether or not your proposal will fit in the context of the approved policy for the area. We also examine the extent to which you have adhered to relevant standards for development that will protect the public's interest. When PAFT is fully proclaimed, after we do that first part, we also network with relevant agencies from which we get advice that is needed. For instance, if it is a development on the coast, we liaise with the Institute of Marine Affairs because they can give us some excellent guidance as to what should be the setback from that particular coast. What would be the waves like, what things we need to protect. That's just to give you an example of the kind of collaboration that's necessary before we completely process an application. Once that is finished, the application is then sent forward to the relevant regional corporation. When PAFT is fully proclaimed, applications will start at the relevant municipal corporation, and in the context of the act, we are calling them municipal corporations. It starts there. They will have a register of all the applications. Now remember, this is significant because in your own spatial area, the council, the people of the area must be fully aware of what's taking place in their area. So it's prudent that it begins there.
I think we lost connection.
We're working on the technical difficulty. While we're waiting, I wonder if Ms. Hines is hearing at all. Okay, we suspend for a few minutes while we fix the difficulty. Again? Well, welcome back, everybody. You know, this really is no accident, you know. It is just to emphasize the importance of the work of the Minister of Digital Transformation, who fortuitously is a member of this committee. So that I know that he will know how to fix the problems, because it happens across ministries and sometimes different JSCs. So we're getting there, Mr. Minister, and you have your work cut out for you, and we know that you will do well. So let us proceed.
Chair, just as a reminder, Ms. Hines was just about to explain what is a simple application. Just a reminder as to where we stop. Thank you.
Yes, in response to your question. Thank you.
Yes, members and members of the public. So a simple application, we were saying, would be those applications for outlying final planning permission once it does not require CEC. And by that, I mean you want to build your house. Once you have no intention of putting it right on the riverbank or on the riverbed, or in some environmentally unsafe place like a really ridiculous steep slope, then you will not require CEC. That is the kind of application that your local authority would then be responsible for. They would also be responsible for any billboards, any advertising signs. You would need to go to them. In addition to that, if you want to change use of the particular structure that you have, residential change of use, residential building developments, any additions, that's the kind of thing you would go to the local authority for, the municipal corporations, once it does not exceed 500 meters square. They would also be responsible for land subdivisions, including engineering operations, comprising less than 20 lots, provided that each lot falls within the range of 465 meters squared, a regular 5,000 square foot plot, and 800 meters squared inclusive. So that's a definition of what simple applications entail. Once PAFT is fully proclaimed and the National Planning Authority is also established, the applications will then move from the new spatial development units. I mean, they will find the name for it within the municipal corporations. They will decide what they want to call it. And it would then, complex ones would be those outside of that. It will then go to the National Planning Authority for those committees there to process the application. Your approval or your refusal will then be sent right back to the municipal corporation that received the application. And that is a bit about what the process would look like. Now, Member Dial Singh, you raised the important issue. It's why is this so important, and what is the relationship with local government? So the point I'm trying to make, it is not only important to establish the National Planning Authority and to get that structure set up, and we are working on that. It is important for the 14 municipal corporations to also establish what they need to put in place together with the Tobago House of Assembly, if the system is to work efficiently and to work well. And as a team, we are committed to making it happen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hines, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me the opportunity.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Backus, I know you're anxious to respond.
No, just to follow up a bit on what was just said in that explanation.
Yes, please continue. Yes.
Okay. So Ms. Hines, the idea of having all the other pieces associated with local government put in place, it's almost like having not seen the work of the implementation committee and the plan that is associated with it. Is it that this is all going to have a big bang approach in terms of how it works, or is it that we're going to do this thing in a gradual way, and so that you have parallel solutions working at the same time? In other words, if the Tobago House of Assembly, as an example, is ready, as its portion of what it needs ready, and we have the other pieces here set, do we wait on everyone, or do we go with that and have multiple, parallel solutions working together? How does this fit into what we're doing? This is the implementation approach I'm really speaking.
Yes, member.
Ms. Hines?
Excellent question. That is our intent. To be honest, we first approached the THA. The concept and the thinking about the evolution of planning, we really felt that the THA would be the first to be ready. Because under their legislation, actually, they are responsible for land use planning and a number of things. So even though there is a town and country planning division office in Tobago, the THA is set up in such a way it's ready to go. And we have been having those conversations. The THA is part, there's a representative on our committee as well. That's what we would like to see happen, to be absolutely honest. We admit and we know that each municipal corporation will not all be ready at the same time. So let's go with those that are. But let's keep the context in mind. There are things that all of local government needs to have, even before one or two might be able to participate. They are still ensuring that relevant legislation and regulations are in sync with PAFT at this point in time. There's still some work I believe that they're doing. The ministry has contributed a lot to those discussions with the office of the AG. So there's still some work I believe that's taking place there, but I can't, be absolutely accurate and give you the details at this point in time, but there is still some work taking place there. But the point that you made, yes, we are go for that.
Madam Chair, may I ask a follow-up question, please?
Certainly, member.
So you just raised another important issue in my mind. You said some municipal corporations may not be ready. And if this joint select committee is about talking about implementation of unproclaimed legislation and how we move forward, do you then envisage that you're going to have two parallel sets of legislation running at the same time, PAFT and the old legislation? Because if all 14 corporations and THA is not ready at the same time, how is that going to work legislatively? Thank you.
Member, my understanding of this is that it is only when PAFT is fully proclaimed that Chapter 3501, which is the existing legislation under which the Town and Country Planning Division functions, it is only when PAFT is fully proclaimed that that legislation will be repealed. So not being a lawyer, and I know there are many in the room right now, I am assuming that in essence, that is what is going to happen. I know of one corporation, I believe it is the San Juan Laventel Regional Corporation. As part of the reform process, they were so excited about what was to happen and what is going to happen that they already rearranged the way in which their building operations function. They started to put things in place, almost anticipating that they will be doing the full range of processing of simple applications as well as to do land use planning. They've even renamed some of their units. So to my knowledge, and let the lawyers explain exactly how this will work, but until one is fully proclaimed, the other one is we still process applications under the other one. I don't necessarily see a conflict, but the legal minds in the room will guide.
Many thanks.
As we lawyers say, let us condescend to some particulars. Specifics. You spoke about necessary institutional arrangements. And we want to know what stage you're at to know how far you have to go in terms of your staffing and organizational structures, the compensation arrangements, and I see you begin to smile, the negotiations between the employer and the union, establishing uniformity of systems with the THA and regulations and other subsidiary legislation. I know you can answer that because it's not like Hamlet, words, words, words. You are going to tell us where you're at. Thank you.
So, Chair, the most difficult part of this process is exactly what you just asked about. So let me be straightforward and upfront and upright with you. So the committee we have called on board. We had conversations with the DPA, and you know that is talking, because the first thing we had to appreciate was that there are people under the Public Service Commission, and then you have persons who are under the other statutory bodies. So it's a different SRC, I think, is the proper term. So that it is not simply a matter of moving staff around that easily. So we have been meeting with them. That's one. We have also spoken to the Chief Personnel Officer to begin to give us guidance as to what is required. Yes, we have been in talks with the THA, their representative as well, Mr. Bobby Andrews, and persons who are part of course, the Chief Administrator has appointed him to be our support on this end. In terms of even figuring out what remunerations would be like in a municipal corporation, we are not there yet. However, in terms of the National Planning Authority, I think it's okay to say who we've hired. PwC, Pricewaterhouse, has been hired, and they are helping us figure out what should be the accurate packages for those senior personnel. And they will also be given the authority to go out and source those persons for us and hold the interviews. Yeah. And literally so in the month of April, the committee meets again and we review our timetable. We would really, really like, I'm watching my little implementation schedule here. We would really like to at least get the relevant parts for the National Planning Authority, that part, within 3 months' time. I am sure after I get off the air, somebody is going to deal with me with that time frame. But I think it's reasonable because we have all of the pieces in place for that one, the National Planning Authority. And then it's going to take, so that when I say place, pieces in place, for them to begin to put out the JDs out there and advertise and that kind of thing, that's a decent time frame. But I shared with you earlier on, some of the other big ticket items may really take as much as a year again.
You know, it's been 7 years, you know. So when you say a year again, that doesn't sound too bad. You know, it means that there is hope on the horizon.
Yes, Chair.
Judge Medial, you wanted to ask a question?
Chair, sorry, I'm jumping in and out, so many different things going on. But I specifically, I was looking at the National Planning Authority and the arrangement we made with respect to staff. I don't know if we can get an update, or if I missed that part, if that was already given, an update on the discussions with the DPA with respect to the arrangements that would take place with staff at Town and Country Planning Division. I'm not sure who would be best placed to answer that question. Perhaps I think someone from Town and Country is here, Mr. Sorry, I have to get back onto speaker mode. Mr. Cook, I don't know if you can give us an update with respect to that and the arrangements for staff and how that process is going. When the process is completed and having Town and Country staff transitioning, and what is the status of that process and those discussions.
Let's have Dr. Kirk, please. We don't want to take away all this hard work for PhD.
Chair, at this point, I would defer to DPS.
Dr. Kirk, I apologize.
Yes, DPS Hines could just reiterate what was mentioned a little while ago.
So
are you muted, Dr. Kirk?
He did answer, Dr. Cook.
He seemed to have been muted. We didn't hear anything.
Okay, Murray, go ahead.
So would you mind repeating, please, sir?
Chair, I indicated that Ms. Hines, DPS Hines, could just reiterate what she just mentioned, because it really answers the question.
Okay, let me just share quickly. Those things have not yet been finalized because we have not brought the union on board just yet. Because the DPA still is going to meet with us to finalize exactly how this thing could happen. And I remember the last things we discussed, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government was actually going to determine exactly how many of their people would be under the Public Service Commission versus the SRC statutory. In addition to that, one particular DPS who was like our champion, he has since retired. Notwithstanding that, he was scanning the corporations to see the fit so that we could determine what additional capacity building would be necessary and who would literally go where and function in what capacity. So, Member Lachmidial, that is not yet, that's one of the most challenging things. We're not very advanced in that as yet. That's the update for now. But come April, when we redo our timelines, we would be able to say more.
So with respect to the exercise that's taking place that you all had outsourced with respect to the structure, the org structure for the National Planning Authority, and you talk about the executive recruitment exercise. You indicated that you would soon perhaps outsource that process as well for executive recruitment. So is it that there is a structure, or at least a proposed structure that you all have already received and considered?
Yes, yes, there is a proposed structure.
It hasn't been fully approved as yet.
I would say no, it's not fully approved as yet, but we do have a structure that we are contemplating, and they have given us excellent guidance as to even the roles of some of the senior persons. Even though it's spoken to in the legislation, but they have really been assisting us with detailing that.
Okay. And do you think that that process of confirming the org structure for the NPA would be done shortly so that you all could proceed then with the executive recruitment? And could you give me a time?
Absolutely. Yes, I put myself on the out there and I said 3 months.
Oh, yeah, 3 months. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Scotland, I think you had a, yes, you may
Yes,
proceed.
Chairman.
And
Good
welcome.
morning. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, my question is, I have seen the ministerial response to the questions given to us. I've read the 17-page document. Chairman, through you, may I ask, and could somebody...
Mr. Scotland, I know you missed the initial requirements for this virtual hearing, but one of the things we ask is that you raise yourself a bit so that we could see you. I mean, I don't want to see just part.
Chairman, it's a matter of the camera. Am I better here?
Yes, good. Yes, wonderful, wonderful.
Chairman,
yes.
Good morning.
All of you, thank you.
Chairman, I have looked at the ministerial responses. I've looked at the entire document. I have it here in my hands. I saw the answers to what are the primary causes for the delay in the proclamation. But Chairman, can we get, and we have not gotten a sense as to when would this actually take fruition? And that question, because I've been listening, I didn't get the visual, but I've been listening. And up to now, Chair, we haven't gotten an answer as to when. May I, through you, ask when? That's my first question.
Member, allow me to reiterate. What we did say is that the implementation plan that we crafted required at least 1 full year of man-days to get everything on track. Notwithstanding that, and those are for the matters that we have complete control over, it does not really allow us to put a time frame on those matters that are under the responsibility of Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And I know that they are working assiduously in terms of local government reform, putting things in place. This ministry has also supported by ensuring there is a line item in the PSIP so that they can get things going. What I also shared earlier on is that we have worked on a capacity building program that we have also shared with them. So there are two sides to the coin. I've also shared previously, a little while ago, that in terms of establishing the National Planning Authority, we are giving ourselves a 3-month time frame to complete the exercise, as Member Lachmidial mentioned. We do have a proposed org structure. We know the executive management that we are going after. We have hired the consultant. We are seeking some final approvals so that we can authorize them to go out there and begin to hire or seek to find the right persons on our behalf. So that's the kind of timeframes that we have been able to share thus far.
Madam DPS, Ms. Hines, yes.
Yes, Chair.
You know, sometimes we can make our work easier by speaking to persons who have walked the road that we are about to walk, so that we can avoid the potholes and we can, know where is the best path to go. And I'm wondering if you have thought about perhaps having discussions with bodies like the HDC that transitioned from Ministry of Housing, or public procurement that moved from the Central Tenders Board, other entities, government entities that have moved from one way of dealing with things into another entity, so sometimes they can give very useful advice. It's all one government service, and there may be things there that are in the bosom of people who have, in fact, walked that road, and they could be of immense help to you. At a moment's notice, they can tell you something that sometimes you're just writing letters and so on. You mightn't get there, but a sit-down conversation, you'd be surprised at how helpful some people can be and are willing to be. Sometimes all you have to do is ask,
Chairman.
Agreed, Chair.
Chairman, through you, for example, and that would have been my follow-up question. The synergies and the utilization of other entities with past experience. I'm glad that the Honorable Minister of Health is here, because if you recall, Madam Chair, and the Honorable Minister will correct me, from about 2008, the Ministry of Health went to the ERHAs, and there was a transformation. And maybe those synergies are you, Madam, and I don't want to direct it at you, I want to direct it at someone who can answer. Is there any plan to do synergies to utilize the past experiences in order to truncate, to my mind, this lengthy time that this process is taking? That's my question. To let's get down from 365 actual working days.
Let me begin by responding, and any of my colleagues could jump in at any point in time. We have actually been learning from some experiences that were not too good. And we have, even our lawyers, our legal people have been looking at what has happened in the past. And you did mention the Ministry of Health. So we did explore that experience. I can't say that we called them in and sat down, but it happened so long ago, there's documented information.
Yes,
we also considered what happened with TAT, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. We've looked at what's been happening with some of the entities, but I do take what the chair has said, and we are very open to being reminded that there are others there we could continue to call on, and we will do so. So thanks for that.
Madam
if anybody
Chair,
else in the team, they can as well.
Madam Chair, through you to Ms. Hines, and for the benefit of the public again today, so I'm playing public advocate today. The public will hear us, and we are talking about a 2014 piece of legislation.
Yeah.
We are now in 2021. Is it the view of the Ministry of Planning and Development that in the 7 years that has elapsed, have things changed? Do we need to take a fresh pair of eyes onto this piece of legislation? or is the 2014 bill still fit for purpose? Thank you.
I will begin, and I am sure Dr. Kirk and DPS Sally at the right time will jump in. So it is not that nothing has happened since 2014. You would be aware that doing just what you suggested, looking at the legislation with fresh eyes, caused us to return to do amendments in 2019. And believe it or not, those amendments included what I shared earlier on, a definition for simple applications. We actually left it out of the original 2014 piece. And there are other things that were left out, and looking again at the legislation with fresh eyes enabled us to address those matters. That's one. Secondly, there was a strategic piece of legislation that must come into place before we could go with full proclamation. And that's the legislation that has to do with registered professionals. What it did, and I have to get the right name, it is the Urban and Regional Planning Profession Act that was only passed in 2020. Now, what is the significance of that bit of legislation? It allows planners, once they are deemed to be planners according to the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Planners, to participate in the planning process. The same way you would know of engineers who are registered, and once their stamp goes on a particular document, it is viewed in a different sort of way. It is seen as if it's been reviewed appropriately, and it actually expedites the process. That's exactly what we went after with that bit of legislation. So there's been amendments. We've introduced critical legislation in the Urban and Planners Bill, we call it for short. So things have been happening. Now I want to make it clear, because Chair, you also introduced that thought. It is not that we are comfortable and everything is going hunky-dory, and therefore, why even bother with this legislation? That's not what it is at all. We knew that the thing, it's a mammoth thing to take hold of and to grapple with, but we couldn't simply sit back and say, well, leave the system, the existing systems as they are. We simply have endeavored to improve in terms of what we do and the way we do business for now, while we're waiting for the act, not waiting, while we are working towards the act being fully implemented, fully proclaimed, because there's a lot more to come when this is fully proclaimed. So member, I hope that that gives some idea.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, just a final follow-up. I promise this is my final. Given what DPS Hines has just said, are you waiting for full proclamation, or do you think there are some parts of the act that could be proclaimed now?
Dr. Kirk, I think you might want to jump in here. I believe we have proclaimed the parts that we need now, but I would like Dr. Kirk to say a few words.
Thank you, DPS. And just to respond to the member, those parts that can be implemented now represents the parts that were actually partially proclaimed, or in fact proclaimed. And so those are the areas that we are actively working on to get started with. And they definitely represent the key aspects, which is the actual National Planning Authority, getting it going, getting the key officers, the Director of Planning, the Chief Enforcement Officer, Chief Building Officers, getting the actual structure in place so as to get ready for full implementation. So that those parts that can be implemented now really were represented by the parts that were in 2015 proclaimed. And so that's what we are actively working on. And as Ms. Hines would have mentioned, during the time we would have worked on those subsidiary legislation that would be needed, use class order and so on, that has actually been been approved and literally just waiting on full proclamation. And again, as of 2019, amendments after we looked at the act, since 2014, yes, and as the member indicated, things have changed. The environment in which planning is done has changed. We looked at it, and what was necessary to bring it from 2014 to 2019 would have been reflected in the amendments that were approved in 2019. And then that critical element, as Ms. Hines was saying, which was lacking, because a key element of the new act is the involvement of registered professionals so as to make the delivery of the planning decisions even faster by allowing them to participate in the whole planning process. But what we found out was that not that we found out, but that an accompanying piece of legislation, which was the Urban and Regional Planning Profession Act, needed to be in place, because what it was saying is that planners were the only professionals involved in the building trade that were not in a position to be registered. So that took place in January of 2020 when the Urban and Regional Planning Profession Bill became an act. It was passed so that now the Society of Planners is in a position to get their council going, to be ready to register planners who would now be part of the whole new planning framework. Without that, nothing could have happened. So what we have done, we have put that in place. We have been updating our policies, getting ready to have that in place so that when it is handed over to the municipal planning authority, those things are going to be in place. We have actually been, as it were, piloting the automated approval process, which is also going to be an element of the new system. So we have been doing things, and as we are saying today, there's much more that we can do, certainly at a faster pace. And I think coming out of today and the fact that we have to interact with the reality, the pace should certainly be much faster, certainly not 7 years again.
That's very heartening to hear. So that when Ms. Hines speaks about a year, you will agree that the year is the outermost limit, and this time next year, everything will be ready. All systems go, would you say? Dr. Kirk?
Dr. Kirk.
I have two DPSs with me. I will let them answer. But I would think that's the thinking at this point.
Oh dear. And I thought you were going to tell me yes, certainly. So let's be
Can I just ask a quick question about the
sorry, but Mr. Scotland's hand must be aching. So let me have him have his say, and then I'll get back to you.
No
but I've been prompted that Mr. Scotland has been waiting for a while in the wings. Yeah.
Chairman, through you, I will give way to my learned friend, and then I will ask my question after. I still have that protocol.
What a gracious gentleman. With Ms. Lutfield, will you please continue?
Thank you so much. Just wanted quick clarification on something with the National Planning Association. The positions that you all have identified that you wanted to have filled, these are contract positions or positions that would be created on the establishment?
There would be contract in the first instance, but the intent would be, because it's going to be the National Planning Authority, so the intent, it's exactly what happened with TAT, the Telecommunications Authority. They were all contract, and then when whatever needed to be put in place, now they are all permanent.
So you would eventually have to engage with service commissions and so on, and CPO and all of that to create the permanent positions. But it is anticipated that that process will happen as well. Okay.
Yes.
And
yes.
there was one other thing. I think someone mentioned that after the 2019 amendments, you also had regulations and subsidiary legislation done. But I just wanted to find out if there are any other amendments to those regulations or any further regulations that have to be drafted and to facilitate a proper rollout of all these different pieces of legislation, not just the PAFB, but also the Urban Planning Bill Act as well, the one that was passed in 2020. Do you need regulations to be done for that as well?
I would let Dr. Kirk speak a little bit more. I know he mentioned the use classes order and development orders. There are things that are already prepared that cannot come into force until PAFT is fully proclaimed. But I think you're referring to any additional regulations. So let me say that even in our response to you, we use the word regulations. But what would have been more appropriate is the word code. Because if it's a code, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's regulations and we have to go to CPC to craft anything more for us. For a subdivision code still needs to be finalized. And I'm going to let the planning expert jump in here and say a few words. Dr. Kirk?
Sure.
Thank you, DPS and Chair. In terms of the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act, at this point, there isn't anything else that needs to be amended. That would have been taken care of with the 2019 amendment. And the key provision for planners to be registered, that was critical and that was taken care of. So that in terms of legislation that is needed to be amended and so on, at this point, there isn't anything. Anything else that would have to be done would be like there's a subdivision code, which is to be completed. So that is one of the things that would definitely be taken care of in the year that Chair has already pointed to. So the subdivision code. There's also a national building code, but a national building code is really the responsibility of the National Planning Authority. So it's not that is needed before the act is fully implemented. That becomes the responsibility of the NPA. But work has started on a national building code. There is a small building code that is used right now, but action has in fact restarted on the national building code, but it's not that is needed before implementation takes place. So that to answer the question in summary, there really is no amendment or amendments that are still required as far as the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act is concerned.
Okay. Just one quick follow-up. Sorry. Just one quick follow-up on that code. You said the code isn't, you don't need to complete the building code for full implementation. Wouldn't the completion of the building code be tied necessarily to enforcement of the provisions in the Act?
Yes, it is. But I was the point I was making, it is not that unless the National Building Code is completed, an NPA cannot be operationalized. So that's the point. It is critical, but it is not that things can't get started without it.
Mm-hmm. But the enforcement certainly would be sort of premised on the building code being rolled out and implemented fully. So in order to enforce, or for them to really, to give it, the real teeth, for want of a better word, that you need to have.
And in response to your question, yes, it is critical. Yeah. I was just saying that it's not that unless that is finished, the NPA cannot get going. That's just the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Scotland. That's it, Chair.
Chairman, may I go, Chairman?
Let me just ask one question, short. When the bill was passed into Parliament, I remember I had a concern about whether we had sufficient urban planners, because in the course of drafting the legislation, we would have had to determine who is an urban planner. So do you think that sufficient number of persons have been identified, so that wouldn't be a problem, you know, with how we roll out the legislation?
Chair, I do not see it as a problem. I would have spoken with my colleagues in the TTS, Trinidad and Tobago Society of Planners. I would have spoken with my colleagues at the University of the West Indies. For example, the current intake has in the master's program 12 planning students who just recently started again. And they are planners, urban and regional planners, so qualified all over the island who are not Trinidad and Tobago, who are not necessarily actively working as urban and regional planners. And I am certain that as long as things get going and the positions are advertised, we are going to find in some cases people crawling out of the woodwork, so that we do not foresee, and this is coming from the Society of Planners, that there is going to be a problem with finding planners. And again, we have planners that are available over the region, because the program at the University of the West Indies prepares planners not only in Trinidad and Tobago, so that I do not, and again, from discussion with my colleagues at the University of the West Indies and at the Society of Planners, that should not be a problem.
Thank you. I didn't like the expression crawling out of the woodworks, you know, because sometimes they may come out with things. And anyway, Mr. Scotland, you have been patient enough.
Chairman, I have noted at page 6 of the submissions that it is advanced that even though the NPA has not been fully operationalized, that spatial development planning continues. But isn't it a fact that due to the non-full operationalization of the NPA, that the spatial development planning has been stymied due to the fact that the NP is not fully operationalized? And secondly, and I want someone to answer me this, hasn't this also affected indiscriminate development, in that because there is no fully operationalized MPA, indiscriminate development is still a phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you for those questions, member. I would have to agree. So let me put this before you.
You would have to agree or disagree. I didn't hear you.
I would have to disagree with you, sir.
Good, I like that.
Yes. Because if I were to agree, the assumption would be that there was absolutely nothing in the sphere and in the space of development planning or of enforcement. There is an existing entity which functions on behalf of the current Minister of Planning and Development, and that entity is the Town and Country Planning Division. It is not as if there is no legislation existing under which we can exercise enforcement, under which we can develop plans, take them forward to the cabinet to be approved, and then get the sign-off to implement. We actually already did the National Spatial Development Strategy even before the National Planning Authority is fully implemented, and the legislation speaks about that. We got it approved at the level of the cabinet, and it is actively being used. We continue to develop local area plans. And there are many entities, not just the Town and Country Planning Division. There are many entities involved in this issue of managing the crazy sort of unregulated development that's taking place there. In addition to that, I would say that what PAF would bring to the fore is increase and maybe more strengthened mechanisms. But it is not that there is nothing taking place. So I would not want you to leave members of the public thinking that literally it is the wild, wild west, even though you may perceive that to be the case at times. I see you're anxious to jump in, so I hope you will be kind.
I am always kind. So, Chairman, in that disagreement, there is an agreement that there is still indiscriminate planning. My question is, wouldn't you agree with me that the fully operationalization of the NPA will stymie that sort of indiscriminate development, especially when we look at the environment and environmental impact?
It would give us, I would agree, stronger mechanisms, even in terms of penalties. So that is a truth, that's a fact. And what I am agreeing with you, what will happen is that there's a particular committee of PAF, the Development Control Committee, where all of the right people would sit at the table, and it gives us even greater oversight in terms of what's happening in the country. Notwithstanding that, though, member, what we currently have is a complex facilitation development committee. You see, we knew that the thing is going to take some time, but we did put other things in place to help us along the way. That particular committee is chaired by the Honorable Minister of Planning and Development. So I agreeing with you, yes, to some extent, it will improve when PAF is proclaimed. There is opportunity for.
But as I get a sense here, well, what you are saying is that what we have existing now through the formal route of the Town and Country Provision Act, Chapter 3501, and although not fully operationalized, but the framework of the MP, it has made spatial development planning a little more amenable and a little more effective, yes? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
My internet was really unstable. My internet was unstable, so I didn't hear all of what you said. I just turned off my video with the hope that I could do better.
Is it that? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Is it that you're saying that the existing mechanism, although not ideal, relative to the Town and Country Act, Chapter 3501, and the existing, although it's non-operationalized, NPA framework under the guidance of the Honorable Minister of Planning and Development, that is being used as a measure before full implementation in order to assist in spatial development planning? Is that what you're telling the committee?
Well, Mr. Scotland, if I may, but before you came, Ms. Hines did deal with that question, in response to me, what is happening now in terms of where they are and how they're trying to proceed based on the present structure. So I don't think we can go over what you missed.
No, Chair, I don't want to go over, but I think she has answered it, and I think I've gotten a sense of where we are at, Chairman. Chairman, these are all my respectful questions.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you here, always.
Thank you, Chair.
Member Rambuja, I think that he had something to say. Ambarat?
Chairman, so I want to thank the team. The written submission was really comprehensive. It's one of the best I've seen, and that has really reduced the questions that I need to ask. There's a lot in there, 17 pages of valuable information. I think the committee was really targeting legislation that has not been activated in any form or has been lying there for a long time. But this is one that clearly, based on what you've been detailing for us, has really been very active. I think we've been all engaged on it because of the importance of it, particularly on the enforcement side, because that has been the major weakness. PS Hines have correctly been saying that we have something in place and something that is workable, but on the enforcement side, it's been terrible. And this is really meant to improve the process, but the enforcement will remain a challenge. So I want to thank you for an excellent written contribution and the details you have provided for us. I just want to ask one question, which is, what do you see as a major challenge, the thing that will absorb the most attention and may really take up some time in full proclamation?
Thank you for that question, member. Let me make one point before I answer your question, and that's a point about the enforcement. What I really like about PAFT is that it will bring enforcement to the municipal corporations as well. So now you will have officers in the 14 corporations, the planning officers, the building inspectors, people who will be given positions as enforcement officers. So there's an opportunity for many more eyes to be on the ground and seeing what's happening, as opposed to a centralized agency that currently exists, that being the Town and Country Planning Division. So there is hope and room for improvement once PAFT is fully proclaimed. Now to the issue of what I think, or what the team has really been discussing as the most challenging thing for us to take on board right now. And I will have to say it's local government capacity building and their readiness to take on this challenge. It's not easy for them. We stand ready to continue to support. But a national planning authority without equipped and ready municipal corporations means nothing, because everything has to start in that place first before it comes up to the National Planning Authority. So I would say we need to put a lot more time and effort and resources and support on that end, including management and champions.
I just want to make a point on your response to the enforcement, because parallel to this, we have an exercise through a cabinet-appointed committee on management of state lands administration and enforcement. And as you know, we have multiple agencies involved in enforcement. But Senator Lakshmi Dayal also asked the Minister of National Security a very valuable question in the Senate on Tuesday, which dealt with how does the police service deal with complaints about violent crimes. And I had to respond on behalf of the Minister and the Commissioner of Police, setting out in detail the process. But one of the things that struck me then and struck me now is when we have these enforcement officers, of course, they're out there, they're doing, we know what they report to us, but does the electronic platform allow the public to point out infringements to us and allow you to direct those complaints from the public to a specific officer, and to also track the manner in which that officer is handling that complaint from the public?
Excellent question. I'm going to ask Dr. Kirk to share a little bit about the intent of complaints and enforcement in the context of the developed TT application system for now.
Thank you, DPS. And just only to reinforce the point that the minister was making, in that the issue of enforcement is one of the key strengths in how we deal with unauthorized development. One of the key strengths in the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act, the effectiveness of enforcement currently continues to be a sore point. And so even down to the penalty for infringements and so on, that has increased. Things have been put in place like enforcement, immediate compliance order, development repair orders, and so on. Things that were initially not there as part of the current act. So the question of enforcement has been strengthened. And even currently with our developed TT, we have started the process whereby people can actually lodge complaints using the system, so that this is something, Minister, that we recognize would be critical and would really be helpful if using the electronic system that we have, that people can be able to do that with the new act. And it's something that we have actually been piloting even now using our present developed TT. So to respond to you, it's a very valuable suggestion, and it's something that we have definitely been taking on board. Obviously, once the act comes into place, it's going to there be even greater facilitation of that actual activity as far as the public is concerned.
I thank you. Because you raised the issue of the increase in fines, I wanna ask you this. I'm pretty sure that we did not deal with this in the amendment to the act, but in increasing the Conservation of Wildlife Act makes provision for the magistrate on dealing with an offense relating to wildlife conservation. The magistrate to award to somebody whose information led to the prosecution of the offense, to award them up to 50% of the fine. When the fine was $200, it was obviously not incentivized, but now the fine for a wildlife offense ranges from 100,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. I don't know of any magistrate who has awarded that to somebody provided information, but do you see, now there's a risk in that, of course, but do you see any value in having that in the legislation, where somebody who provides information which leads to an enforcement action, a successful enforcement action, could be rewarded by a percentage of the fine?
Minister, it's a valuable suggestion, but it's something that we would have to discuss with the legal people to see if it can be part of the new framework under the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act without having to be leading to an amendment to the legislation. So it's a very, very valid point, and it's something that the legal people would have to say to us, how else can it be done? Could it be done through regulation? How else? So it's something that we will note and we would pursue without, and we definitely, we haven't seen the need for amendments, and honestly, we would really want to avoid having to go back to the act at this stage. Based on all that we are saying, we are about implementation and operationalization of the act, but it is something we will see how it can be included without having to need amendment to the act.
Have you been having any talks with the Attorney General's department with regard to different legislation that would impact your operationalization of the act? Have you spoken about the House of Assembly and the municipal corporations? But what about Environmental Management Act, Public Health Ordinance, Integrity of Public Life Act, Land Tribunal Amendment Act? I mean, have you been having talks with the Attorney General along those lines?
We have had lots of collaboration with them. I mean, CPC guided us in terms of the 2019 amendments. We worked along with the CPC and the local government in terms of the local government reform, because they are still working, I believe, on bits of legislation to ensure synergies. So we've had those kinds of conversations. and they have assisted us in doing what we needed to get done. You mentioned integrity in public life. I'm aware that PAFT, as it stands now, speaks to these senior executive positions as being positions in public life. As a matter of fact, which does not exist now. The director of planning on the PAFT will become a person in public life. So I'm not too sure what else you're going to recommend that we do. I'm listening out.
We suggest going forward that perhaps you can talk to both CPC in particular and the legislative, the legal affairs division, because there seems to be some confusion as to your interaction with them. I don't want to go into correspondence received from both sides, but there were some things disturbed us, and I think we would recommend that there is some discussion with these entities to make sure that you have done all that you were supposed to do to allow them to do what they can to assist you.
Thank you, Chair. I have documentation that says exactly what we have done with them. And to be honest, at this point, the CPC has done its bit. There is no need for further collaboration along the lines of developing regulations or any amendments. So from our perspective, we all good. But I take what you said. We will reach out to our counterparts there to see if perchance there may be a tad bit of miscommunication.
Yes, we perceive that. So I think it might be useful to have a little discussion, to make sure you're all on the same page, whether regulations are needed or not, whether you have asked for or submitted a policy document. It was a little, we're a little disturbed that you may not be on the same page. And it's all one government, so we would want to make sure that you talk to everybody that you ought to talk to, and they talk to you and advise you as best you can. But I think from what I see here today, we feel very heartened that you have been working assiduously at your end to do what is required. And I must commend you, not only your responses to us, but I dare say, if I may, that you seem to have found your niche here, and more of that anon. But very impressed by how you conducted yourself this morning, your knowledge, your commitment. And when we have these, what I have found in chairing these meetings is that every time we sit with the senior persons in the ministry, we realize that there is a lot of talent in the various ministries. And it's very difficult to understand why the public service has such a bad name. But we meet people who are extremely talented, people who are extremely committed, and very qualified, and doing excellent work. So again, I think I speak for all of us when we say that we commend you and your team, and just ask you to continue to do the best you can with the resources that you have, and hopefully the resources that you will get, so that ultimately what we want is a more efficient working public service, for the better Trinidad and Tobago that we seek to have. So it's been very instructive sitting with you this morning, and I know that Mr. Bacchus will be observing that there are technical glitches that we need updating, perhaps your IT material and all of that. So we have taken note of all that has happened, planned and unplanned. And at this juncture, all that is left for me is to ask you to make brief closing comments before we say goodbye to you, so that we will all have our lunch, especially the parliamentarians. So, begin.
Thank you. On behalf of the team here and on behalf of my permanent secretary, Mrs. John Duraj, And I know that our minister is also very much interested in how this would have gone. We really want to thank you. We thank you for the questions posed. We thank you for the opportunity and even the recommendations that you've made. We are taking note and we will take them on board. We are also very thankful for the accountability and the oversight. The fact that this team took the time to investigate these matters. So we have no objection to you keeping track on us so that we could actually follow through on all the things that we have promised to do, and we will. We absolutely will. So on behalf of the team, thank you kindly.
Well, this brings to an end our inquiry that we started today on the delay in the full proclamation of the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act and other pieces of legislation that may be lying there and just need to be prodded into existence. So we proceed next week, next month, with our mission, and we thank the public for their attention. And left for us to say, have a good day, all of you. Members, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, and good day to all.
Very welcome, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Well done,
Thank you, everyone.
Are you in your car, sir?
I thought I was the only one that used to have to do virtuals from my car, so I'm glad I have company now. Bye.